Hey guys, it's Dr. May. Thank you for joining me today for the sixth and final video from the Understanding Developmental Trauma video series I've been doing. So this one's the Love and Sexuality style, and I'll be getting to this in a second as soon as I share my screen. All right. Okay, so this one is the last that kind of develops in the course of our development. So some of the other ones started way back, even prenatally, and then they developed early in life and so forth. This one develops a little bit later, between 4 and 6, and then in early adolescence. So if you had issues during that period of time, this is probably when this one would start to come up for you. So just a brief intro, just the general gist of what this one's like. So as you can see in the picture that I kind of threw together here, it involves a bit of a split between love and sexuality. So you disconnect the two. So if you grew up with parents that made you feel uncomfortable about your budding sexuality, you may not have been able to integrate it into your full being. And so you adapted by disconnecting from it and disconnecting your love experiences from your sexuality experiences. Okay, and there's a few key dialectics that come up in this style. So obviously the key one is love and sexuality. So on the one hand, you might be comfortable in loving relationships, but not very comfortable integrating sexuality into them. So as pictured in the picture there, maybe you're married and, but sex is not really the most comfortable thing in that relationship, or if you're, even dating somebody or so forth. If it's more extreme, it could actually become like you're anti-sex, you're very moralistic and judgmental of other people's sexuality and your own. On the other hand, sometimes you kind of have a secret sexual life or a very obvious sexual life, but you don't put love into it. So you might have a lot of sexual relationships without love or connection. So you might be promiscuous. You might have a lot of partners. You may date people for sex only, but not really develop a deeper connection. So sometimes that becomes the style, the way it manifests. Okay. There's a little less obvious dialectic here. So what happens also could be that you're performing well or looking good on the outside. Like you're very putting a lot of energy into your outer appearance, into your outer presentation to the world, into being successful, sexual conquests, accomplishments, and things like that. But there's also like a shadow side of you where on the inside, maybe you don't quite feel good enough. So you're compensating for the experiences you had where that part of you wasn't good enough in terms of the way your caregivers responded to it. Like your sexual part wasn't okay, your loving, vulnerable part wasn't okay. So you have to find ways to hide that and put all your energy into the outside. So this is kind of something, the inner-outer split happens in some of the other styles as well, as you might have noticed, but it also happens here. Okay, so related to that, another way of putting it is that you might be very into doing. So doing, accomplishing, keeping busy, performing, all that kind of stuff, but putting less emphasis on your feelings. So either minimizing them or not wanting to pay attention to them or judging them, but putting less emphasis on the feeling because it's too vulnerable for you and too uncomfortable, and putting much more emphasis on doing stuff and keeping busy and accomplishing. Okay, so those are the main ones. But one thing we can reflect on too is love and sexuality and other subtypes, because most people, as they enter adulthood, in one form or another, get into romantic relationships or dating relationships, sexual relationships. So how does this play out in other types? So a lot of other subtypes, struggle with this as well in their own style. So just as a brief overview, so the first one we talked about in the series is a connection type. So in essence, that involves where you really want to be connected to people, but you're also afraid of it because you've had negative experiences in the past. So as you draw closer to somebody and you get too close, you get afraid and then you start pulling away. So they struggle with love and sexuality also. So it's hard to fulfill the mature demands of an adult relationship when it's hard to get close to someone because it brings up fear. So sometimes it's a coping style of being a little bit impersonal or disconnected when things get close as a coping mechanism. And if they do have sex, or, you might feel a little more disconnected during it just to cope with it, because really feeling it and being in the moment with love and feeling is overpowering or too frightening. So you might go through the motions of sexuality while putting your feelings aside. Okay, so that's the connection type. Next, the attunement type. So the attunement type, just a quick overview here, is where you get very good at being attuned or aware of other people's needs, sensing what they need, giving them what they need, and being who they want you to be, in the hopes that they'll eventually pay attention to your needs, or that in general, people, the universe will eventually bring it back to you, and somebody in your world will pay attention to you. So this is a little bit more of a younger feel to it, where it's almost like the picture where there's a younger girl and maybe a father figure that she's dating. So she's dating a man who maybe is older or has more of a fatherly style, or maybe someone you're more looking for a parent figure in a partner rather than just an equal partner, because you're looking for someone to satisfy your very young needs for attunement and care and in that younger way. Trust types. So these are people that tend to dominate and control because they're scared of being too vulnerable and controlled by other people. So they say, well, I'm not going to be controlled again like I was when I was a child, or taken advantage of or exploited. So I'm going to be the one being in control. I'm going to be the one who exploits. So in their relationships, they tend to be more dominating of other people. So if they have sexual conquest, it's to dominate someone and feel in control. There might be some verbal abuse in the relationship if it gets to that point. So they're not as capable of a mutual healthy love relationship, because mutuality brings up fears that they're going to be dominated. They have to be much more on top to feel secure and okay. Autonomy types. So that's the one we just did in the previous video. So they're also afraid of being pressured, dominated, and controlled by others. So they might have grown up with parents who pressured them to do certain things or to be certain ways, and had a hard time saying no, because being yourself was not really reinforced. It was only reinforced when you were doing what other people wanted you to do, but then you felt resentful about it. You sold that on yourself. So you're always in that middle ground of, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to please myself and please other people and create that healthy balance with healthy boundaries. So if I'm in a mutual love relationship when I'm older, that feels scary to me. I'm afraid I'm going to be controlled by my partner and told what to do and pressured to do certain things. So it might be really hard for me to have that comfortable sense of feeling safe in a relationship. I might be afraid I'm going to be, smothered or lose my freedom and independence. So that might be hard for me. Okay, so that being said, let's get back to how does this develop in the first place, the love and sexuality survival style. So let's look at the developmental origins. So there's two key time periods, as I mentioned before. So one is between age 4 and 6. So as you can see in the picture, it's kind of like that age of innocence where there's maybe certain little crushes on other children, or you're kind of innocently go to your parents in more of a seductive way, like kissing and hugging and touching, and maybe a little bit more of a sexual way than you did before. Not explicitly per se, but a little bit more, because it's like an early budding kind of sexuality happening. So if parents see that and then they start invalidating you for it, maybe making you feel ashamed about it, or punishing it, or yelling at you, or saying, what's the matter with you? Why are you doing that? You might start to, at this point, separate from the sexual part of yourself. And remember, when you're little, you're just full on into it. So love and sexuality is a full body experience. It's very touchy feely. It's your whole heart is into it. So when your parents shame you for that, you start to shut that part down, because you don't want to lose their love. You don't want to have them criticize you, make you feel bad. So they might, at this point, encourage the more neutral heart expressions, that are just more innocent love expressions without any kind of slight sexual connotation. So you kind of sense what's okay and what's not okay, and you start to cut out and separate yourself from the parts that weren't considered okay in terms of early budding sexuality. Okay, so the next stage happens around the onset of puberty. So in the book, they said, around ages 12 to 15, but, technically speaking, it could be a little bit earlier, it could be a little bit later. Okay, but basically when you're starting to physically develop and you're developing some certain interests in other people in dating and so forth, parents could sometimes feel uncomfortable with that. They might not know how to touch you anymore, know how to, if they should hug you, if they should get close to you. They might feel a certain amount of jealousy that you're interested in a loving way in other people outside the family, outside of them, and kind of discourage it because they wish the love was still directed at them. Not necessarily in a sexual way, but just more in like a more general way. So they say they kind of broke it into like fathers and daughters and mothers and sons, although this could be, you know, a little bit mixed up as well. So let's say, you know, a father and daughter had a close relationship when she was a kid. And, you know, then her body starts to change. And now he's feeling like a little uncomfortable. Like, can we still pal around like we used to? Are you different now? I don't know who you are anymore. You know, he's bringing boys home maybe, or girls home, depending. And, you know, now he's feeling he's withdrawing a little bit. He's not sure what to do. And the girl might feel a sense of rejection by that. The father's discomfort is making her feel like maybe there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with who I'm becoming, or my physical development, or, you know, my maturity. And so it becomes like, I'm starting to feel shame about it now, and I need to handle it a certain way. And so the split, the love sexuality split begins to happen. They also talk about mothers and sons, but I'm sure it could be other, you know, parents and children as well. So let's say the mother is now uncomfortable with her son's sexual self and certain developments there, and that's handled in a shaming way. So the son might start to feel uncomfortable about his budding sexuality and feel like he has to hide certain things or kind of not be fully himself. Okay, so as usual, there's shame-based and pride-based identifications. So in the shame-based identification, part of you might be like, you know, I don't even know what love is. I'm not sure if I'm capable of loving anyone or having a good relationship. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure if I'm good enough. Because your whole self wasn't accepted, you start to wonder these things. So even if there's certain aspects of myself that my parents felt were okay, there's other aspects they felt were not okay. So I start to feel like my whole self may not be okay. And I may not be able to be in relationship with someone if I'm not fully okay on the inside. So that leads to a certain fear of vulnerability, because vulnerability is exposing your real self to another and hoping that they respond in a loving, caring way with your best interests at heart. So if you didn't fully get that, of course, you're going to worry that it's going to happen again. So you may be afraid to show your feelings towards someone and show them how much you love them, or, you know, because that's a big risk. So you might have a certain amount of restraint in saying I love you or in showing the love. If you want to reach out and open up and you're fear of rejection, you may start to pull back. You may wait for the partner to initiate gestures of love. Or if you had a fight, you might be afraid to be the first one to say, I'm sorry. You might wait for your partner to say, I'm sorry, or make it up to you. And so like you're rejecting parts of, your parents rejected parts of you, you're rejecting parts of yourself. And now you're projecting it out onto others, being afraid that they're going to reject parts of you. And so it leads you to hold back in certain ways to try to protect yourself. Okay. So the holding back, the staying small is more of a shame-based way of being. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now there's a pride-based counter-identification. So this is when you're more focused on the outside presentation. And so you're building your self-esteem from what you're doing rather than who you are. So you might have a sense of perfectionism, that I have to perform, that if I do things on the outside that are good, that'll help me get to enough. The quote that I put here is, I'll be so perfect and attractive that everyone will be drawn to me and I'll never have to face hurt or rejection again. So if I'm good enough on the outside, then people might accept me and then I'll finally get to enough. Okay, I'm not okay as I am on the inside because that part was rejected, but the only hope I have of getting acceptance is being okay on the outside. But when people love what's on the outside, I still fear that maybe I'm not good enough on the inside. Okay, so I might strive for perfection, strive for performance in a high energy kind of a way. I might study a lot. I might train a lot. I might work really hard at things. I try to be attractive and successful and a go-getter. I might try to perfect my physical appearance. I might be a little into fashion and makeup and hair and plastic surgery and working out and stuff like that. In a high functioning kind of a way, these could be like they said here, the doers, the winners, the sports heroes, the cheerleaders, actors and actresses, people who like are really put together on the outside. If you're not sure if someone's going to love you for who you are, you might want admiration instead of love. It's at least a substitute. It's better than nothing. Having someone admire you for your accomplishments, praise you for doing well and succeeding, at least it's something. I still would prefer if they loved me on the inside, but if I don't believe that's possible because of my shame-based identification, at least they'll love me for who I am on the outside, who I project to be on the outside. Okay, and so my own self-esteem and feelings about myself are the same way. So I might feel good about myself when I feel like I'm looking good today. Like the song says, I look real good today. It's a commercial like that. If my image is good, if I'm performing well, if I'm getting good grades, if I'm making the promotions at work, then I'm okay. So I'm accepting myself based on doing okay rather than just being myself. All right. And I still might have always that feeling like, no matter how much I do, I'm never quite enough. All right. So like I was starting to say, to get to this sense of being okay, I might be a high energy doer rather than a feeler. So that's the earlier dialectic we talked about. So it's easier to focus on doing than it is to focus on feeling, because feeling is a much more vulnerable place to be. It's much more deep, it's personal, it's my real authentic self. And so getting in touch with that's a little harder. So I might not want to deal with my emotions very much. I may not trust them. I might be insensitive to my feelings and other people's feelings because that's how they were treated earlier in my life. So it's much easier to focus on keeping busy and doing stuff. So physically, given it's high energy doers, I'm a little bit more hyper aroused or have high arousal. So that's a sympathetically dominant style. So my sympathetic nervous system is dominant. I have a lot of motor activity because I'm doing, and my breath might be a little tight, a little armored chest, because I'm a little bit protective and also very like, let's do it. I'm not relaxed. Okay, so there's also two subtypes to this love and sexuality subtype. So the romantic subtype. So as you might be able to guess, so this is the one that's a little more focused on the love end of the dialectic. So when I'm okay with the love side, I might romanticize love, romanticize things like partnership and marriage and romance and candlelight dinners and all that stuff. But I might have a harder time integrating sexuality into the relationship because I might be afraid of my sexuality. I might feel disconnected from my sexuality. So I might struggle with that part. So my romantic relationships might feel a little more platonic, or I might get a little more anxious if sexuality starts to get more into the mix. At the extreme, less integrated subtypes might become very disconnected from their sexual impulses and actually become like prim and prudish moral crusaders. Let's look at this picture I found. So the guy looks very stern, very, moralistic, sex and marriage and its consequences, sex before marriage and its consequences, right? No, you shouldn't have sex before marriage. You shouldn't give condoms to teenagers because they shouldn't be having sex anyway. You shouldn't be giving them birth control because they shouldn't be getting pregnant anyway. People who say things like that, who are very like prudish and prim and proper about sexuality, are anxious about their own sexuality because it was never fully accepted. So you cope with that by having a moral code and being strict about it and having a structure because it makes you feel safer. And you might hold it to yourself and have your own moral code that you put on yourself, but you also, in certain cases, might impose it on other people. So it makes you feel like people around you are more under your control, more manageable. And if you can't have it, they can't have it. It's kind of a little bit like that as well. So there's a bit of a judgmentalness toward other people, and all that's a sense of keeping control. The other subtype here under the romantic subtype, so subtypes under the subtype, okay? Repressed romantic subtype. So that's like you're kind of repressing your own sexuality, you're judging the sexuality of others, but sometimes it's driven underground and explodes in another part of your life. So this is like the prim and proper minister who has a giant porn collection, or he has a beautiful wife and children and things like that, and is running around having affairs with women in bars at night, and no one would have any idea because he's so prim and proper on the outside. Okay, so I found an incredible quote here by Grace Kelly, which I think really captures it. Sorry, it's a little small, but basically it says, "Hollywood amuses me, holier than thou for the public, and unholier than the devil in reality." So it's a big split between the image you're trying to put out there, like I'm this, very moralistic person, but on the other side, you're running around doing, sexual things, maybe being promiscuous, maybe getting obsessed with porn, so forth. Got it? Okay, so now there's a romantic subtype. So that's one pole. Then the other pole is a sexual subtype, because remember, these are split. So in the sexual subtype, you're also focused on the outside rather than the inside. So you're more focused on seductive sexual behavior rather than the feeling of love and connection, because they're not integrated. Okay, so you measure sexual satisfaction by how often you're having sex, how many conquests you have, how many partners you have, the kind of things you're able to do, your potency, how desirable people find you. And so you're building your self-esteem based on that. But sometimes it will, well, actually all the time, but, in this subtype, when you're having sex with people, you don't want an emotional connection. It's easier to have sex with strangers than people you know. When the relationship starts to get a little closer, you might freak out and start to leave. It's much easier just to go from person to person and keep it impersonal. You're not really connected to your deep sexual pleasure. It's just very much focused on stimulation, like on genital stimulation, not on like emotional, full-bodied sexual pleasure, which is more integrated. Okay. And again, maybe fascination with even more disconnected sex in the form of like pornography, which is, images and body parts and people you don't even know. Okay. So focusing on the partners and relationships aspect, sometimes there's a bit of a narcissistic flair where you want to pick a partner that makes you look good. So again, this is about focusing on the outside. So maybe I want a really beautiful partner, a really accomplished partner, a really good looking partner, somebody that I could show off to my friends and make me look accomplished, like I finally made it in this world, and you mistake like seductiveness for intimacy. So it's the conquest and the seductiveness of the relationship is more important to you than actually getting close to the person. And just finding that attractive person and being able to seduce them makes you feel a certain sense of accomplishment and pride, because this is, part of the sexual end of it. Sex becomes the primary way of being in touch with your body. So instead of just other kinds of touch or other kinds of connection, self-connection, physical connection, it becomes sex is the only way that it's okay. And again, you might cope by, if you are in a longer term relationship, you might have difficulty feeling aroused by your partner because you're so used to variety, you're so used to the conquest, to the excitement of it, that if it's the same person, it's easy to get bored and you might end up breaking off the relationship. If you do stay, there's a chance that you might split sexuality and love by having some love with your partner and then finding affair partners to have sex with that you have little little emotional connection with. So it's split between people. So that's another way it could play out. Okay, so moving toward healing. So clearly, as you might guess, one of the goals is to integrate love and sexuality rather than keep them separate. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Millionaire Matchmaker. It's not on the air anymore, I don't think, but this woman, Patty Stanger, used to set people up, and people who were struggling to find a relationship, would come to her, millionaires, usually with a lot of money, and she would set them up with different people. And she would say, listen, no more than 2 drinks on the date. You have to be more connected. You have to be more with it, more yourself, so you can build a real connection with the person. No sex till I forgot how long she said you're supposed to wait, how many months, because she wanted them to integrate love and sexuality, not just like jump into bed together and, move too fast, because it doesn't give it a time to connect. You need time to develop the emotions, to develop the connection, to develop the intimacy. And then when sex comes in, at that point, it's easier to integrate it. So she was really trying to work on this with people. So I couldn't help but think of that while I was putting this last slide together, although I didn't put it in there. But if you ever want to watch Millionaire Matchmaker, you'll kind of get a little bit of that flavor, but I'm not sure where to find it at this point. So anyway, so we also have to integrate the feeling and the doing. So allowing more heart connection and vulnerability in yourself, surrendering to your own emotions, not just to another person, and allowing the feelings that are more vulnerable, knowing that things are a little bit different now. It's not just you being invalidated by your parents. You're in a different situation. You're more grown up. You could handle different things. You could develop different kinds of ways of accepting yourself, accepting your full experience. Sometimes if you're struggling with the emotional end of it and you're much more connected with the performance end of it or the sexuality end of it, try to start to conjure up times in your life where you did have some hard feelings, maybe at a more innocent, younger time in your life, and try to build on it from there. See if you could recapture the feeling and then start to find ways now that you could, in a healthy way, recreate the feeling. And if you have shame about sexuality and you're somebody who's more of a moralistic crusader, try to work on that end a little bit more and try to work through some of the shame and accept it a little bit more. So even if your parents didn't accept your budding sexuality, you can still accept that part of yourself and, maybe start in a slow way so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. Okay, so some things to consider. So in DBT, mindfulness, certainly, because you want to tune into how you're actually feeling and not just be too into the doing. Dialectics, because we are talking about several dialectics here and putting the two sides together, such as love and sexuality, feeling and doing. Internal family systems, because it's different parts of yourself and it's about accepting the different parts of yourself. I would look up Brené Brown because she talks a lot about shame and vulnerability. So a lot of this is allowing yourself to be vulnerable so you can connect with people. It's really a prerequisite for connection, allowing yourself to be safely and slowly vulnerable to connect with another person. There's also a really cool person named Esther Perel, who's like a couples therapist, and she has some really good videos out there. I would look her up. And also probably a few books, but the main one that I read personally is called Mating in Captivity. And she talks about this exact thing about, how people have a hard time integrating love and sexuality. And when people feel more of that around the hearth love, sexuality doesn't seem to go with that. But you need both in a relationship. You need that novelty, the sexuality, the excitement, the eroticism. So she talks about both of those things. So she could say it probably better than me. So I would just check her out if you're interested. Okay, so that's that. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll be back soon. I have a few ideas of some things to do next. I just have to get some time to put it together. So as always, thanks again, and hopefully see you soon. All right, be well, you guys. Take care.